to those who are attending, thanks very much for coming along. As you know, this is part of our we have a regular series of Simon Talks where we talk about different issues and around homelessness, and it's designed as a way to sort of broaden out the context of our own thinking and investigate ideas with sort of making use of people who are interested in the area of homelessness. There are a number of people that we would talk to as we develop our own policies and our own understanding of the issues, particularly issues outside of homelessness, perhaps the social factors that we would engage with. And we think it's always useful to share that experience and expertise with people who are colleagues and friends of the Simon communities. So as we build up a community of knowledge, so it's not just our interpretation through the lens of the services that are provided for people experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. It's also through sort of a shared community experience. This week obviously is Simon Week, so we're doing it slightly different this week, and we have I'm going to allow Wayne O'Connor, who's going to chair this session, because I'm actually going to have a different role this week of being a spokesperson. So Wayne O'Connor, who some of you may have seen, wrote an excellent piece on the polling that we're discussing today in the Sunday Independent at the weekend. And Wayne has agreed to sort of chair that, and maybe it allows him to put his journalistic intuition into gear to help stimulate debate and discussion around the issues raised around the poll. So I'm going to, with further ado, I'm going to hand over to Wayne to take over the chair.
So, thanks very much, Wayne. I'm delighted to be here, and thanks for having me. And hopefully I can get a couple of good questions to you and the other panelists here. The first panelist I'm going to introduce is Derek Bell from Red C. He's going to outline, I suppose, the details of the poll that I covered at the weekend and give us some important background there. Derek Bell is a research project manager at Red Sea Research. Derek has worked in the Irish market research industry for more than 10 years now, covering a wide variety of industries and social research topics during that time. He's a dualist researcher and holds a BA in anthropology from Youngstown State University, a professional diploma in digital marketing from the Digital Marketing Institute, as well as a certificate in social network analysis in cultural anthropology. That's a mouthful. The plan we have at the moment is we're going to do a questions and answer section towards the end after our last speaker has spoken, towards the end of this webinar. So there's going to be a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen where you can all put questions forward. Depending on how we go and what sort of questions we get in relation to Derek's presentation specifically, if there's some questions of a technical nature or are looking for clarifications on what he's talked about, we might take one or two questions at the end of Derek's presentation, but we'll see how it goes. So feel free to get those questions in. And Derek, you're welcome to begin.
Great. Yeah, Wayne, thanks so much. And thanks to all for this webinar. It's really great to be a part of this. So yeah, I'll share my screen and kind of get into the report and talk through the findings that we pulled together. So just one second here. Perfect. So that should be okay for everyone to see, I think, right? So yeah, so just firstly, just to talk through some context in advance of going through the findings of the research. So it's no surprise to many with the situation at the moment in Ireland regarding inflation and just how that rise in inflation has affected people's income. The figures from the latest report of the central bank, we see that inflation just continuing to rise over the course of the last few years, but it's reached a high point. This is not new news to anyone, obviously, but the latest results. The latest results from Red Sea's Consumer Mood Monitor. We run that 3 times a year. And basically we ask people what their expectations are for the next 6 months with regard to their discretionary income, discretionary disposable income. And when we ask them that, we see that 79% as of July are saying that they expect it to be worse than it was previously. So I think we're just kind of painting a picture of a negative kind of feeling that is permeating throughout the country at the moment. Meanwhile, at the same time, we have the rental property market increasingly precarious. Sorry. And we see the supply of rental properties really reaching a low point as of 2022. Again, this is not new news, but just kind of connecting the dots as a prelude to the results. So we see rental prices are continuing to rise. These figures here are based on an index figure that is the average is 100 based on 2012. It's more than doubled since 2012. So we've got the situation where rental properties are, we've got the less rental properties available. Those that are available, the prices are going up. So it's just creating this really poor situation for people with regards to housing. This here is from the latest results of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage Homeless Report. To the left, we see all adults 18 plus. Over 7,000 are homeless. These are just the adults, not including children. But what this slide does is it breaks out by ages. We see 18 to 64-year-olds are really most affected, and in particular, those 25 to 44-year-olds. So this is something that kind of this theme continues on throughout the results that we found with the latest polling. So with this in mind, this challenging situation, Simon Communities really suspected that the homelessness situation, the hidden homelessness situation, was a significant problem beyond what we understood the main homelessness situation to be. And Wayne Stanley of Simon Communities sought to better understand its true scale. So we worked together. They were in touch with us, and we pulled together a survey. For those who aren't familiar with Red Sea, we have offices in Dublin, Dundalk, and London. We're one of Ireland and the UK's premier providers of research-based consultancy services. We were founded in Dublin in 2003. We have been providing high-quality research-based consultancy services to both blue chip and up-and-coming businesses, both nationally and internationally, for many years. We prescribe to our 3 pillars, which are research, evaluation, and direction, to help our clients see more clearly. We are highly regarded in the industry by some of the leading brands around the world, some of which you can see there on the screen. Our approach, after discussing with Wayne, felt that the best approach would be to run a nationally representative survey amongst an 18 plus adult population via Red Sea's online omnibus, which is a red line. Using our exclusive Red Sea Live panel. Through the Red Sea Live online panel of over 40,000 members, the red line allows us to reach a representative sample of the adult population in a cost-effective and timely manner. Quota controls were used to ensure a nationally representative sample of adults 18 plus, with interlocking quotas to provide extra confidence in our sample profile. The data was weighted across gender, age, region, and social class so as to ensure a nationally representative sample based on the latest CSO projections. There were 1,015 respondents that participated in the survey during 22nd to 27th of July, 2020. So figures are weighted on gender, social class, age, and region. And what did the results of the research tell us? What we found was that hidden homelessness is, in fact, touching the lives of a notable proportion of the Irish population, with 1 in 4 reporting either themselves, family, friends, or acquaintances affected by this. We asked them 2 questions on the survey. The first one was, do you know someone staying temporarily with another household because they do not have a regular address of their own where they have a tenancy? And we gave them multiple options, either like themselves, family, friends, acquaintances, and they could multi-code, so they could select, I am experiencing this, and my friends are experiencing this. And in some situations, they may have selected themselves, friends, and family. So we did find that 1 in 100 reported that both they themselves and their family are personally experiencing this. So we see at the top of this chart here, friends of mine are doing this today or have done this in the past 12 months. 9% of the population 18 plus are saying that is the case. So it's important to perhaps bear in mind that this isn't saying that they're currently at this exact moment experiencing hidden homelessness, but they could be. But it's also saying that they could have experienced it 3 months ago, and maybe they're not experiencing it now. So that's outside of the scope of this particular research piece that we did. So just to bear that in mind as we're looking at the figures. So 9% say that friends of theirs are doing it today or have done in the past 12 months. 9% saying that acquaintances of theirs are doing it or have in the past 12 months. 8% family members doing it. 5% say that they themselves are doing it or have done it. And then when we look at survey, they themselves, family, friends, or acquaintances, so their entire network, including themselves, we see that 26% of the 18 plus population are claiming to know someone like that is experiencing it or has experienced it. So really highlighting that this is a huge problem in Ireland at the moment, and it is quite extensive. We also see pulling out that they or family members are experiencing it. Over 1 in 10 are saying that is the case, and then 1% are saying that both they themselves and their family members are experiencing it. So 1 in 100 people are saying that that's the case. So really just a problem here in Ireland at the moment. On the next slide here, we break this out by demographics. So on the left, we see one of the figures from the previous slide. So these are the 5% that say that they themselves are experiencing hidden homelessness or have done it in the past 12 months. And when we look at it by gender, age, social class, and region, we see that those 18 to 24-year-olds are much higher than any of the other age groups, whereas 55 plus age group, they're not really experiencing that at all. So we're finding that those younger people, as we saw with COVID, they're disproportionately affected by the current housing situation with rising inflation. Earnings are not as high amongst that group. They definitely are taking the hit with this current situation. We also asked we also showed by family members that have done it in the past 12 months, we don't see quite as much. There's nothing particularly significant, no significant highs or lows amongst this group, maybe slightly lower amongst the higher social grades, but it's really that amongst that the younger age groups that they themselves are experiencing it. We also asked, amongst those people that did say that they themselves or someone in their network are experiencing it or have experienced it, we asked them what the situation was. Like, is it something that is temporary, or is it an intended or forced situation? And what we found was that of those knowing someone like that or experiencing it, that they mostly tend to describe the situation as being unintended and without a clear leaving date. So just really continuing to paint a negative picture of the situation. So we see the exact wording of the question was, again, thinking of those who you say stayed at any point in the past 12 months with another household while not having a regular address of their own, which of the following do you think apply? And we asked, again, like temporary situation had clear leaving date, situation as unintended or forced, none of these, don't know. And very high proportion say that they themselves, family, friends, or acquaintances, that the situation is unintended or forced. So 3 and 4, it's a very, not a defined leaving date. So very uncertain, great uncertainty surrounding these particular groups of people. Now, that being said, there are some indications that those who say that they are experiencing it themselves, that they maybe feel a bit more in control, and that you see the 55% situation as unintended or forced. Whereas if someone says that it's their family, friends, or acquaintances experiencing it, they're more likely to describe that situation as unintended or forced. Whereas someone experiencing it themselves may feel a bit more likely to say that, you know, it's temporary, it's a clear leaving date. So that's something just to bear in mind. We've broken this out also by demographics. So we've got gender, age, social grade, region, and marital status also included. Again, like just to go back and show you where these are coming from, you see the 24% all the way on the left, temporary situation had clear leaving date amongst both themselves or their wider network. And then we've got the 73% situation as unintended or forced, again, amongst that wider group. So we're just showing both of those figures by demographics. And when we do that, we really want to focus in on social grades, so that those that are in higher social, those that are earning more have in higher social grades versus lower social grades, who are or maybe more and somewhat more marginalized, so to say, in certain situations. We see that the situation is less defined for those lower social grades. Whereas with the higher social grades, the situation is very clear. They have more of a temporary feel to it. So a very precarious situation for those lower social grades who are maybe, you know, family might be sleeping on someone's couch, or they themselves are sleeping on someone's couch without their own home, and they don't know when that situation is going to end. So again, like not a great situation. So to summarize, so hidden homelessness is a significant problem in Ireland today. Poll results provide evidence of the hidden homelessness problem in Ireland. 1 in 4 either experiencing this themselves or knowing someone who is currently or has in the past 12 months. These results are perhaps even more poignant given the lack of sufficient housing, rising energy costs, and economic forecast for continuing rise in inflation through 2023. When we look at society as a whole, we see that the hidden homelessness situation is disproportionately affecting younger people, but perhaps more worrying is the high level of uncertainty amongst lower social grades as to when the situation will end for those affected. This does highlight the precarious nature of the situation should economic conditions worsen, which at this point, it certainly seems that they very well could. So that's kind of it there. So I may pass back to Wayne, and he can take you on to Alicia.
Very good. Thank you very much, Derek. That's really interesting stuff. And even a week on from when I first saw these figures, it's still startling that that the issue is so prominent, I suppose. There are no questions yet in relation to Derek's detail and I suppose the technical detail there. So we're going to move on to Alicia straight away. But if you do have any questions further on, please feel free to drop them into that Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end. So yeah, we've mentioned Alicia. Alicia Fahy is a graduate of the University of Limerick, and she is head of operations with Midwest Simon Community and is based in Midwest Simon's head office at Speaker's Corner in Limerick. Alicia has been with Midwest Simon Community since 2017. She manages all the homeless services within the organisation. These include 3 emergency hospitals in Limerick and Clare. There's a tenancy sustainment programme, the Housing First programme, and Clanlua projects. Alicia has worked in homeless services since 2005. She began her career working in emergency accommodation in Limerick and later moved to Toronto, Canada, where she spent 8 years working in homeless services with a large number of organisations such as Loft Community Services. Alicia brings her extensive experience of social care and working with the most vulnerable in society to Midwest Simon Community, and is going to tell us about that now. Alicia, you're very welcome.
Thanks for that introduction, Wayne. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Yes, as Wayne mentioned, I've worked in homeless services for over 20 years. I don't have any fancy slides today. I suppose my role today is to tell the stories of 3 people who have accessed Midwest Simon Community services and who have all experienced hidden homelessness. From our experience here in the Midwest, the impact of the pandemic and the increasing cost of living is pushing many vulnerable people into poverty and housing crisis. And more people are at risk of becoming part of the hidden homelessness community. Many of the people will not show up either in official statistics and are not visible. They're often staying with relatives or friends, sofa surfing, living in overcrowded conditions, squatting, or not connected to support services, and without a home to call their own. As Derek mentioned, with inflation having accelerated at the highest rate in years, rising rents and energy bills, this is going to have a serious knock-on effect on many people who may well be forced from their homes and have to rely on friends or family to provide them with a bed. Hidden homelessness is a very complex issue, and because it isn't visible, many people are slipping through the current system undocumented. So here are some of those stories. Eddie's story. I became homeless around 2021. My landlord sold the apartment I was living in. I tried to get a new apartment, but couldn't afford what was on offer, which wasn't a lot. Becoming homeless affected my mental health greatly. I attempted suicide on 2 occasions, and I was living on the streets. Thankfully, both attempts were not successful. I was on the streets on and off for about 1.5 years, grabbing the chance to sleep on a couch here or there when I could. I ran out of people I could ask for help, or as people get sick of you hanging around their house. I experienced a winter on the street that was the coldest I've ever felt. I was also subjected to a lot of abuse. It ranged from teenagers throwing water bottles at me and other things to being assaulted. I admit that I'm frightened to ever experience homelessness again, and I do not believe I will survive it. The way I describe it is that it is as if you are running through a tunnel with no end in sight and no one to turn to. This is Sean's story. I was living in my family home in Limerick. Drink started to take over my life, and my father was also struggling with alcohol. My father died at the age of 57, which affected me a lot. I was very close to him. Then this started my alcoholism to spiral out of control, and I decided to leave the family home as my relationship with my brothers broke down over my alcohol intake. I left my family home at 35 and moved onto the streets. I slept rough in park benches, in alleyways, in bushes, and in church doorways. I was very ashamed of my situation. I was sleeping in very harsh conditions, and one morning when I went to get up, I couldn't walk as I suffered from scoliosis. I got checked into St. Joseph's Hospital as a voluntary patient, where I was in a wheelchair for 18 months. When I was back healthy again, a friend offered me a couch for a few weeks for a small fee. This didn't last long either, as my friend didn't want me hanging around for too long. It was only a short-term agreement. Then after 6 months of being back on the street again, I linked in with Midwest Simon Community, and I was offered a place to call home. I felt independent and grateful. It's as if I've won the lotto. This is John's story. I became homeless at the start of 2020 due to rent increases. I could not afford to pay the rent while living on a social welfare payment, even while in receipt of HAP. I started couch surfing in January. I was going between friends and family until my welcome ran out. I felt like I was a burden on everybody. It was putting a strain on my friendships and family relationships, as no one had space for my dog and me. I was desperately in search of accommodation, each day looking at rental properties, but having no luck. I bought an old car and started living in it with my dog, and that is all I could afford. For 11 months, I linked in with local authorities and the Homeless Action Team to try and secure accommodation. One of the issues that was affecting their ability to place me in homeless accommodation was because I had a dog. I felt there was no level of inclusiveness or understanding as to why I didn't want to give my dog up to go to a new home. As a single male who just lost their home, my dog has been at that time the only thing that kept me sane. He had been through everything with me. He was my source of security. He was protective, my company, and also my source of heat. That's all you could get from a home. In the end, I had to make the dreaded decision of giving my dog to a friend as my health started to rapidly decline. I became very ill living in my car during the bad weather conditions and from not eating daily as there was no amenities to cook due to being homeless. I developed gout and in the end lost my leg and have become an amputee. My frontline experience of homelessness before entering services was definitely a very difficult one, both mentally and physically. I look back now and don't know how I get through all the struggles. Since entering Midwest Simon Homeless Services, I've been supported from all angles. I could not thank them enough for everything. They've helped me with my mental health and physical health transition with becoming a wheelchair user. It is September 2022. I have just received the keys to my own property from the local authority and I will be reunited with my dog. I never thought I would see this day come, and with the support of Midwest Simon, it was achieved. So that just gives you, I suppose, a little bit of an overview of experiences that people are having, you know, and look, this is only the last couple of years that these individuals have become homeless and have experienced hidden homelessness. I suppose they highlight the damaging impact that hidden homelessness can have on people, both physically and from a mental health perspective also. Research shows that the earlier that someone experiences hidden homelessness, the more likely they are to develop complex needs. I suppose, and although Ireland has a legislative definition of homelessness, it does not reflect the causes or the experiences of those who are homeless. And the current definition excludes families and individuals who are hidden, couch surfing, staying with family or friends, living in cars, and they're not counted in the overall homeless count nationally. This creates significant gaps in considering who is eligible under domestic homeless policy. An expansion of the definition would extend protection to vulnerable people experiencing housing precarity. And these people are hidden statistically, and the expansion of the definition is crucial from our perspective in responding to proliferating rates of hidden homelessness. I think it would also allow us to confront the issue from a victim-based approach, which would give us a clearer picture as to the extent of what's going on and to help services anticipate current and future need. And this is something I think that, again, is very precarious. We believe everybody deserves a home, but the current demand outstrips the supply. I suppose we're all fully aware of the lack of social housing, along with record rising rent costs in the private sector, they're contributing to homelessness significantly. And I suppose improving housing supply will play a key role in breaking this cycle. But there also needs to be increased investment in social housing and delivering more affordable housing for all, including the private sector. I suppose another key factor that we're looking at, especially in the Midwest, is looking at the vacant properties across the country with a view to bringing these properties back onto the market to relieve some of the pressure. I think in the Midwest, we have one of the highest proportion of vacant properties across the country. So as the cost of living continues to rise and the pressure mounts on household finances, I think we need to look at the challenges and the barriers so many are faced with. We need to work collectively across public and private sectors to find long-term solutions that can address the issues and help end hidden homelessness. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand you back to Wayne.
Thanks very much, Alicia. That was really good. I think it's important that you do tell those stories and that you do humanize, I suppose, what Derek told us before you as well. And it does kind of give us the human impact of this issue. So as I said earlier on, we are going to take questions at the end, so feel free to send those in. Before we do that, we're going to come back and hear from Wayne Stanley again. For those who are not familiar with Wayne, he is the national spokesperson and head of policy and communications with the Simon Communities of Ireland. He leads on the strategic development of the organisation, working closely with the board of directors and the 8 Simon communities to achieve the organisational goal of ending homelessness in Ireland. Wayne joined Simon in 2019, having worked in the homeless and housing sector for 15 years. He's currently chairperson of Home for Good, a broad-based campaign seeking to secure a referendum to enshrine a right for housing in the Constitution. And he's also former vice president of FIANSA, the European Federation of National Organisations working with the homeless, where he works with colleagues to tackle homelessness in Europe. Wayne, I suppose, what's your take on what we've heard so far?
So I think, firstly, thanks to both Derek and Alicia. But so if we start kind of around, just to give some of the analysis that we've done on this, I think we're very much standing kind of at the foothills of our unpacking of both what's in the poll reports and understanding what we should be doing with that information. I mean, I think what Alicia has highlighted is how and it was particularly, it came across in those stories that there were multiple factors that led to the ultimately to having to cross the threshold of a homeless services or to ending up rough sleeping. But the fundamental thing, the fundamental nature of having a home and a secure and affordable home really came across as well, that those other issues around mental health or addiction could be managed if we had a home. And in fact, we know that because a number of the Simon communities are providers of housing first solutions, where we take people who may be still in addiction or with mental health and provide wraparound supports. And that's been a very successful program. So in terms of the polling, what we want to do really, I suppose, the next stage for us with this kind of research is to look at how do we better understand what we're looking at here. So we tried to go for as tight a definition in working with Derek as to what hidden homelessness is. And that being a situation where somebody is staying temporarily with in another household because they don't have their own tenancy. And we also asked with the second question to look at the people who would describe that situation as unintended or forced. And that gives us a base from which to start to look at what is the over the course of a year, what is the true extent of this. And we come out with very large numbers of people impacted by it. I think those large numbers also need to be seen in the context of the number of people each year who experience homelessness. So while the monthly, Alicia mentioned some of the defects in, some of the limitations of what we call the monthly numbers. But we also know, I mean, there is other data there that shows that the sort of the flow through of the number of people who experience homelessness each year is much higher than any individual count. The people are, moving out of homelessness, coming in, and over a period of time. I know research by Ona Sullivan in Trinity shows that over, I think, 4 years or 8 years, 40,000 people experienced homelessness. And when you think that that's really the sharp end of the official figures, is people in emergency accommodation, that's an extraordinary number of people who have experienced homelessness in 2014. So it's less surprising in that context, the depth of and breadth of what we would consider hidden homelessness. However, as Derek made the point, that the poll shows over 12 months. Now, obviously, what we'd like to do maybe is to get a point in time figure and find ways of asking more questions and sort of digging down into that. But there's also ways we can start looking up. With polling, the way I think about polling is because you're getting a representative sample of the country, you're really looking down and trying to work out where people are at. The other ways you can look up, and there are some really good work that's been done in cities in Belgium, where they've looked at using administrative data and the engagement with different services and people who are perhaps can be identified as being at risk of homelessness or in those kind of hidden homelessness situations, and that gives you. We find that tends to be multiples again of the number of people at any one time in emergency accommodation. So for us, really, it's starting to impact it. I think what Alicia has highlighted as well is one of the issues about how we look at prevention. And that's why it's really important that we do look at this hidden homelessness element, because regardless of the intensity of the experience of hidden homelessness and the distance that experience of hidden homelessness puts you from homeless services, and that broader question about how that relates to the level of social capital you have, and social and economic capital you may have. But we know that everybody in that poll and their family and their friends who are affected by the situation are having their life chances limited by having that period of hidden homelessness. So what we want to do, I suppose, is two things. One is to recognize the scale of it, because we'll have a more equitable society where we have more capacity to support people and reduce the potential for social issues to drive people into homelessness if we can attack the entirety of the issue. But also, as we seek to unpack it and look at what are the indicators, the stressors that we know are going to push people into homelessness, and how do we look up into our society and sort of identify where we can put the supports to prevent people having to cross the threshold and end up in homeless services. Hidden homelessness is particularly important, as we saw from the poll results that Derek has done. Even if we look right down to the base of people who were identified themselves as having that experience, the gender balance of that isn't, and we have to be careful, because the 5% of 1,000 people is 48 to 50 something people. So we have to be careful when we're extrapolating, but the gender balance in it is much lighter or much closer than what we see if we look at official homelessness figures. The age demographics are unsurprising, but particularly the weighting towards younger people is something that we need to be identifying, because it could be, and we see this in our own work where we work with young people who are perhaps leaving care, that there are precursors to in people's life and traumas and experiences in their younger life that can later lead to homelessness. So I think all of that is what we're starting to unpack, and I suppose that process of beginning this polling trying to get to those questions and adding in, I think for us, adding in that second layer of questions around whether it was short term or whether it was forced or unintended, has been really important in trying to address or trying to understand better what the true scale of it is. And I think we were surprised by the percentage of people who described it as unintended or forced. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at. So the next stage for us is one is to look at how we can better understand, and that means utilizing perhaps administrative data, and hopefully we can convince the government to do more of that work. We also hope to continue to work with Red C and other colleagues to tighten these definitions and maybe better it, because as with all of these things, as a sociologist, the more data you get, the more questions it raises. So we hope to continue to work and maybe find ways of digging down and starting to answer those questions in the hope that we can prevent more people ending up in homelessness. But the broad question, actually, and what Simon Week has been about this week is, how do we get ahead of all this and start working around prevention? And the fundamental, no matter how many good homeless plans you have, how many good prevention plans you have, and we can do better on prevention. Ultimately, it's a supply of secure, affordable housing that we need. And we have identified, particularly this week, we're looking for people to row in behind us and support this idea of addressing the vacancy. Alicia has highlighted in the Midwest the high percentage, but there is vacant properties all over the country. And then we can move on to dereliction, but it's really a part of this week's campaign and ongoing campaigning by the Salmon Communities of Ireland, that we would really ramp up the potential and capture the potential, at least in the short term, for the level of vacancy that's there. And we hope to see more progress on that in the coming days. So that's really where it leads us. You know, doing this research isn't about producing the biggest number, it's about increasing understanding. And that's what the Simon Week campaign and this polling feeding into that is really about. Thanks for that.
Okay, thanks very much, Wayne. Appreciate that. We're still open to taking questions, so feel free to send those in, and I'll get the ball rolling maybe by asking a few of my own first. Maybe we'll come back to Derek first and go in the order that we did the presentation in. Derek, obviously you carried out this polling, and you carry out polling like this all the time. I just wondered, did the findings surprise you at all? And also, I wonder if you could maybe tell us about the potential to build on this data and the polling that you've done, and the value that would have if we were to continue it going forward.
Sure, Wayne. Yeah, thank you. I think researchers generally go into conducting research with a little bit of a hypothesis in their head as to what they might uncover in the process. I didn't quite know what to expect, but I think both Wayne Stanley and I both had expected it to be high, which is why the research was carried out in the first place. But this did seem to be higher than what we would have expected, I think. I know we had talked about at great lengths about possibility of overlap in people's networks across the people that had carried out had participated in the survey. Like, say, one person knows, for example, like two participants in the research maybe know the same person, and maybe they're both referring to that same person. So there was a, I guess, suppose we were given consideration to the figures being higher than they really were in actual fact. But in Red C, we feel strongly that this is a robust sample size, and that the representativeness of the sample would mean that these numbers are not significantly off. So they're a very true reflection, we feel, of what the situation is out there at the moment. You might get some situations of some urban areas maybe where like in Dublin, where people know more people, and you might have a bit more of that going on. But where we definitely feel confident that these are the this is the representation of what's going on at the moment in Ireland. So with regard to, I guess, carrying this research forward, that's always the most exciting thing, I think, for researchers, is to see how the data might change over time. And we would expect that, I think that if efforts are made that can make a dent in that number. But if the economic situation worsens, then you could very well be looking at these numbers going up even higher in the near future. So but there's great potential, I think, to carry on this research in the future, and see how to monitor the situation. I think that's the most important part.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Derek. Just while we're on the idea
Sure.
of numbers, I bring Wayne back in here, Wayne Stanley, and we'll come to Alicia again in a second. Wayne, a feature of the piece I wrote at the weekend was your summation that up to 290,000 people could be affected by this issue. You might explain how you've come to that number, and I suppose what that means, please.
Yeah, so I suppose taking account of what Derek just talked about, and the potential for, limited though it is, the potential for overlap or double counting, we wanted to tighten it back. So the 1 in 4 figure is, I suppose, is everybody who's been touched by it, or knows somebody who's been touched by it. And I think there is kind of a societal impact of people not being that close to, or feeling that close to, this level of crisis in people's lives. So I think it's valuable to document it. We wanted to, I suppose, then narrow down to perhaps that the unintended and forced situation. And I suppose in thinking about that, we wanted to have a level of intimacy in the relationship. So we limited to personal experience and somebody in their family who had that experience. And then where that experience was unintended or forced. So that put us down to about 7% of the sample, which is how you get to the 290,000 figure. So that's basically how we did it. And I suppose part of going beyond the individual experience was a recognition of the hidden nature of hidden homelessness. So people who are perhaps in difficulty, not answering polls, and you know, sort of trying to equalize for that to some degree, and recognize the, as I say, the hidden nature of hidden homelessness as well, which is why we expanded out beyond what the personal experience. But even if we had limited to personal experience, where it was unintended or forced, you know, you're still talking about 114,000 people. But I think sort of counting at least one person where somebody identifies a family member, are not dual identifying, but it's just identified that someone in their family has had this experience, I think perhaps gives us a truer sense of the scale of it. So that's how we ended up with the 290,000.
Okay, very good. We have a question there from someone writing in, and I'll put that to Wayne in a minute. I'll just come to Alicia for a second as well, because Wayne there touched on the unintended and forced aspect, I suppose, of hidden homelessness. And Derek has done that as well with the data. I think the data showed that 73% of people who knew of someone or who are reporting hidden homelessness themselves, they described the situation as unintended and forced. And that seems to be the case, Alicia, with the stories you told us, John's story in particular. I think, is that typical, Alicia, that maybe people do kind of end up in a hidden homeless environment prior to engaging with the likes of yourselves down in the Midwest?
Yeah, it's certainly, like, I mean, I'd say a good 60% of individuals that we would deal with would, you know, try everything within their power not to have to access emergency accommodation services. for one reason or another. And I think shame, you know, has a lot got to do with it. And, you know, I suppose people's pride is involved. And, you know, so certainly they will extend their hand to friends, family, acquaintances prior to presenting themselves to local authorities or homeless action teams. Look, it's something that we come across all the time, not necessarily just with individuals, but also with families as well. I mean, yeah, I think John's story was very profound, you know, and he went to the extent of buying a small little car, you know, just to ensure his safety and the safety of his dog. And he was very reluctant to give up the dog, who was his safety net throughout all this, you know. So there's all these circumstances and all, you know, going on in the background for people. And it really is very, very difficult for individuals to say, okay, I need help, hold my hands up, you know. But we experience that all the time across all services.
Okay. And Alicia, I suppose Derek's data also touched on the rental sector and how prices have rapidly increased there in recent years. Is that a feature in what you're experiencing down in Limerick as well?
Absolutely. I think we were looking at staff here in our offices were looking last week at rental properties in Limerick, and there was 12 available properties across the city. And I think the cheapest rent was €1,200 for a 1-bedroom apartment. I mean, that goes way beyond what any of our, you know, clients that we would work with, or indeed people presenting just for advice and information, would be able to access, even with the, you know, the increased HAP. You know, it still doesn't even hit what the rents are going to be. People will be leaving themselves short for food, for heat, for light, you know, just trying to put a roof over their heads. So, I mean, they're setting themselves up for failure straight away, you know what I mean? And they just, what they're earning just can't reach what the rents are at the moment.
Yes, thank you. And I suppose the cost of living increases that we've seen recently do play a role there as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'll come to that question that we have from one of the attendees here. They haven't provided their name, but they're thanking you for the presentation, guys. And they're saying that as an elected rep, can you progress the findings from your work? Or as an elected rep, how can I progress the findings from your work, such as broadening the definition? Wayne, that's probably a question you're probably best placed to take.
So there's probably a couple of ways. Again, as I say, there's the top down, the bottom up, and the sort of the sideways. One of the things we could do, and I think Alicia touched on it there, is the current definition of homelessness. While it's sort of in the policies around homelessness, there's a recognition of there's a mention of the ethos, which is the European typology on homelessness developed by Fianza, which looks at the different stages of, I suppose, housing exclusion and hidden homelessness. And so gives us a broad definition of how we would count those pressures. That's covered a lot in policy in Ireland, but it's not in our legislation. And one of the things is around prevention, is that we could look for a new legislative definition. The definition that's there was actually put forward by a senator from Cork, who was actually a board member of the Simon Communities of Ireland, Senator Ryan, and he powered away in the 80s and got was instrumental in getting that definition of homelessness into the 88 Act. I think perhaps that needs to be updated. That's one of the ways. I think the other thing is any pressure that can be put on
I think we've lost Wayne. I'm not sure. He's frozen on my screen anyway. Is that the case for?
Same for me.
Yeah.
Frozen, yeah.
Well, look, we'll
Oh, I think he's back there.
Are you back with us, Wayne?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there.
It's okay. It's a bit of a technical glitch. You might continue your point, please. Or have we? I think we've lost Wayne again.
The broad thing is elected representatives can play a huge role. There is there's both the legislative changes that could happen and broaden the definition of homelessness, which would help local authorities to direct resources closer to prevention. There's some good work being done, but I think we can enhance it. And then we should be looking at working with the department and working with the Minister's office and putting pressure on for a broader understanding and reporting on the nature of what we're seeing in our administrative data, such as the housing needs assessment, where maybe we can identify more people. Because I think the trick is not just to get the biggest possible number, sort of to the true scale of the crisis. I mean, that's important, but the real thing is, how can we find out who those people at risk are, and those cases that Alicia has mentioned? Like, if we could have got services to those people at the point early on as they were experiencing the crisis, and if we'd had the supply of housing to divert them into, I think a lot of misery could have been saved even in those 3 cases she mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. Alicia, there's 2 questions here for you. The first one, I suppose it's saying that you rightly highlighted the current definition for homelessness, or hidden homelessness excludes those sleeping in cars, etc. Does the current definition or counting of homeless figures create barriers for people accessing housing support?
Well, I suppose the barrier would create for people who are experiencing homelessness is that if they're not being counted as being homeless, then I suppose they're not being expedited into emergency accommodation and put on the housing list. So it definitely does create a barrier for those individuals. Yeah, look, I suppose in terms of the support, other supports that they could are on offer, it would certainly be kind of advice, information, like with within Midwest Asylum Community and other agencies. But certainly it would prolong an individual's situation because they're not being counted by the local authorities.
Okay, so the counting is key. And then you also, in your presentation earlier, you mentioned vacant properties, and I suppose they're a huge issue lately and very topical. What is there any difficulties accessing those properties, and if there are difficulties, what are they?
Well, the difficulties in access them is, I'm not certain about what the breakdown is of these properties across the country, but certainly in the Midwest, a lot of them are owned by the local authority or private landlords. So, I mean, if it's a private landlord, it's up to the private landlord themselves to either renovate them and put them back on the market. But certainly with the local authorities, these properties tend to be, in kind of lower socioeconomic areas, and a lot of them are just boarded up and have been left there for years and years. So in terms of accessing these properties, I suppose AHBs like ourselves could be looking at, CAS purchases and stuff like that to bring these back on stream. But I suppose the difficulty around, CAS is that it takes such a long time, for the process to happen. So I suppose there would be some of the difficulties for sure.
And what's striking to me in terms of what you said there is that a lot of the properties are in lower socioeconomic areas. And Derek's data tells us that a lot of the people affected are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So essentially we have lots of empty units or empty homes in places where these people would may be from, or where they may have lived in the past, which is probably very disheartening for you guys and services trying to help people affected by the issue. Wayne, I'm going to come back to you just on the vacancy and dereliction point, if that's okay. You have a plan in terms of what you would like to see done to tackle vacancy and dereliction. What is it?
So what we looked at was how can we generate as much activity and as many properties as we can quickly. Now there's 2 sides to it. Alicia has mentioned some of the public housing that maybe long-term voids that could be brought in line, and I think that is for the local authorities to attack, and they should be, and there is resources there to do that. And I know there has been some good work done over that in the last couple of years. I think where maybe there's more opportunity is in terms of the vacancy that's in the private market, and working with landlords. And there are a number of options. You could go down the compulsory purchase orders, really go after those properties in that way. And there has some work been done in that, particularly in the I think in Dundalk and Louth area over a period of time. But I suppose I was speaking to an official who noted that if you have to go the CPO route, probably, you know, that should be the last resort. Really, there's an engagement process, and we have a thing called a repair and lease scheme. So our proposal is that the government would enhance that, at least for 2 years, get long-term leases with landlords of minimum 15 years, and that allowing the local authorities to build up their own capacity and stock, which is obviously ultimately the answer. The potential in it is, we know on, you know, census day there was 166,000 units identified as being vacant. So we need to capture about 3% of them next year, and 3% of them the year after, to give us an additional 10,000 units over those 2 years. That combined, if the local authorities can meet the targets that have been set for them in other areas, that would give us 15,000 units a year, which would be more than the number of people joining the housing list each year. That does two things. One is, if they're allocated, they can be allocated directly to people who are long-term on the housing list and to people who are in homelessness, and to get people off, perhaps out of the HAP system, creating more capacity in the private rental market, but also critically, you know, getting that flow of accommodation in place to move people out of homelessness, and perhaps for people who are at risk. What we were looking for in the budget, which didn't happen, was increased investment in that scheme, an additional 500 million towards putting in a grant element and a higher level of loan to broaden the scope of the properties that could be brought into use. I think everyone agrees that the targets that are set around repair and lease are very low, and we really need a higher level of ambition. It should be noted in the budget that they did bring in a vacant property tax. Now, in our view, and I think in the view of most people, it's too low to really generate huge activity. But I think the paradigm shift in thinking about vacancy in a different way is important to acknowledge. But there's a lot more work to be done. So we were looking at 5,000 units of vacant properties brought in each year. It won't be easily done, but in the current crisis, particularly as we're seeing building costs increasing, the potential there is something that can't be ignored, in terms of, we have vacant properties, why don't we get them back into use? And also the environmental and impact of that, like the most environmentally friendly home you'll build is one that's already there. And I suppose the third aspect of it is, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, so that's the crux of it. The 5,000 units putting in. Sorry, the other aspect of it was, we wanted to see increased capacity in local authorities to build up the expertise in there, which allows us to move on. To continue to move forward on this issue, so that the vacancy over the 2 years creates increased capacity in local authorities that can then help to move into areas like dereliction, over shop units, and the conversion of shop units, empty vacant shop units, into homes, which is something they've done really successfully particularly in Copenhagen.
Okay, very good. So essentially, part of the plan is focus first on the vacant units that are going to be easily turned around, and then bring them back into use, and then maybe look at the more complex issues, such as dereliction and the houses that are going to take longer to turn around and get ready and make habitable, and come to those at a later date, which makes sense. We still have time to take a couple more questions from anyone who's looking in, so feel free to send those in. And Wayne, I'll just pick you up on one other point you made earlier, and that's I suppose you're talking about the better use of data abroad, and how you would, I suppose, like to see data, work with the government more on data, and what it can provide, and what would be made available. What kind of things would you be looking at there?
So I mean, basically what you do is you look at where do we collect data, where are we engaging with people, and where are we engaging people where they may highlight they're at risk of homelessness. So that's everything from taking social protection data, and indeed sort of the frontline experience of things like community welfare officers who are supporting people, and pulling that into the system. You also have the health professionals who are perhaps working with people who are under significant stress, are aware of people who maybe are living in difficult situations, so they're engaged with their families. And even, you know, so as we gather up this data, obviously there's GDPR to think about. We have to think about how we can, you know, ensure that we're not stigmatizing anyone. But at the same time, I think we can get a truer picture. And the reason why it's important isn't just to collect the data. And I really want to make this point. It is about also having a really true understanding of the nature of the homelessness crisis and how we get ahead of it. Because, as I said, and again, this comes out in the polling, we know that, you know, services were built for, historically have been built for the image of homelessness, which is a single male. And certainly services tend to be male orientated. And we also know that women, in the way that they engage with homelessness and the way that they manage relationships, are more likely to be in hidden homelessness. So we get an imbalanced or sort of certainly gender imbalanced picture when we don't take the totality of the picture, when we're just looking at sort of emergency accommodation or even the flows through homelessness, which gives a broader picture. We're always going to be underestimating the number of, particularly the number of women experiencing homelessness. And I think administrative data gives us a better sense of the true scale of the crisis, but also the true nature of the crisis and where we need to be providing the supports. So it's really about reaching out into all that administrative data and drawing it in to increase our understanding.
Very good. We have a comment here from Maria Tivnan. She's saying, thank you very much for presenting this issue from quantitative, qualitative and lived realities and giving clear ideas on what is possible. I suppose I'll put a question to Alicia again. Just Alicia, what's the big change you think could see make a dramatic impact down there in Limerick, or what's the big thing you'd like to see done?
Well, for me, Wayne, it's identifying individuals who are at risk of becoming homeless. I think that prevention piece is going to be key in reducing, you know, people experiencing the hidden homeless piece, or indeed eventually people who end up homeless. I think we really do need to focus on prevention services. You know, I suppose the current situation is that, you know, you have to wait to actually have no roof over your head to present to a homeless action team to be able to access services. And I think that is at the very latter end of, you know, I suppose the difficulties people are experiencing. So I think if we could grab those individuals earlier on, they are experiencing difficulties of paying rent, bills, whatever the scenario is, you know, and, you know, trying to support them by providing those wraparound services around those families or individuals, which, you know, hopefully will in turn enable them not to enter into homeless services. I think that's going to be key.
Okay, very good, Alicia. I suppose we still have time for questions anyway, if anyone does want to get a question in. Alicia, was there anything in the budget yesterday that you'd have liked to see a little bit different, or was there anything where you'd have hoped for a little bit more, or was there anything that took you by surprise that you welcomed as well?
Yeah, I suppose the couple of things that I look at, you know, any increase in social welfare payments is always welcome. I do think that, you know, at €12 on an individual's payment isn't going to go very far in light of, I suppose, the level of increases that people are going to experience. You know, the energy piece as well, the €600. Again, I think I would have rather seen a cap on energy prices as opposed to, you know, giving individuals, you know, money just to give back to the energy companies. But certainly, I suppose that, you know, a positive piece was, you know, for renters as well, you know, they're getting the extra €500 tax credit for renters. Again, I know it wasn't a massive amount, but certainly I think it will support people to try and sustain tenancies. And yeah, I mean, another piece I think Wayne mentioned earlier on is just around the vacancy piece, that you know, they are going to be increasing the property tax for vacant properties. Again, do I think it was enough? No, but certainly it's a move in the right direction.
Okay, and I suppose one thing that Derek stated to us as well, one extra thing that we haven't really touched on is just the security of tenure and how that does seem to be, the insecurity there in the industry seems to be impacting younger people in particular. Is that your own experience as well, Alicia, before we finish up?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, that the 18 to kind of 24-year-old cohort, I think they are the individuals that are being hit the hardest at the moment, because look at, they're struggling to, I suppose, move out of home, look at renting. I mean, we're getting inundated with kind of college students needing to access our food banks, for instance, now, because they're, you may have overcrowding situations with students where there's 3, 4, 5, 6 nearly in one room, in a hotel room, so it's quite shocking, actually, particularly amongst that age group, where you'd imagine people are just starting out in their lives and they could, head off out and flee the nest, but certainly, I suppose that cohort are finding it a lot more difficult these days. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, Derek or Wayne, I don't know if you have any final comments before we finish up. Is there anything? You guys want to add?
Yeah, I actually Alicia, it was really great to hear those stories that you shared with us. The one that I think really stuck with me was I think it was the second one, Sean, and he was talking about how it was like, from the research, I kind of had this view of like a fixed occurrence, like based on like one occurrence of, oh yeah, I experienced hidden homelessness. But that story that you shared really brought to life how someone could be bouncing around. They're almost like using up all their support, so they're going from one family member to the next, one friend member to one friend to the next, and just highlighted how it's just a never ending going through the tunnel, as I think the one story was, and that it's never ending. So yeah, I think that if we had the opportunity to do that in the research, where we could see how many times someone has experienced it, that would be interesting, just from a personal curiosity of mine, to see what's the max number of times that somebody may have experienced it in the last year.
Yeah, because I suppose that would even help to humanize just the data even more. So whilst Alicia is able to come in there and tell us these personal stories, that other questions like the one you're highlighting there, Derek, actually would, I suppose, humanize everything a little bit more for us. Wayne, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
Yeah, it was just to follow on from what Alicia was saying around prevention things. I mean, I think the other aspect, so obviously we constantly refer to, anyone who's heard any of these talks before, there's constantly references to Finland, and the way that they sort of worked away using a sort of a housing-led or housing-first initiatives to address homelessness, where they've got to what we would consider, they don't, but what we would consider perhaps a functional zero, very low levels of people in emergency accommodation. So, but the way they've done that is to identify people in the situation, as Alicia says, but also to have a stock of housing to which people could be diverted. So rather than spending time in an emergency accommodation, actually, when they recognize a person is at risk, they have a stock of housing there from which they can quickly divert that person or that household into. And they recognize homelessness as a trauma, and one that needs to be addressed. So they have that, and they're anticipating need and anticipating what the stock should be. Now, obviously, we're far from there, but that's where I hope we will get to at some point. And that's really why the vacancy thing, really we're pushing that, because it is that kind of significant step forward and significant level of ambition that we're going to need if we're going to get ahead of the crisis that we're in.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. So I think that's it from us. Thanks to Wayne Stanley, thanks to Derek Bell, and thanks to Alicia Fahy for their contributions and for the engaging discussion. As Wayne said earlier, this is going to go up on the YouTube page later on today, and it's up to me, I think, as well to thank everyone for watching and for tuning into us. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.